Welcome to the Bulletin Podcast.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Brandt School Bulletin Podcast. I am Alyssa and I will be your host for today's episode. Today, we are lucky enough to be having a conversation with and getting to know Professor Guntram Wolff. Now, Guntram has recently been appointed Honorary Professor for the Faculty of Economics, Law and the Willy Brandt School of Public Policy here at the University of Erfurt. Guntram holds a doctorate in economics and is the current director and CEO of the German Council on Foreign Policy, and prior to that, he was at Bruegel for almost a decade. He has also worked for the French government, the G20, and the European Commission. And if that's not enough, he has also published numerous works on European political economy, economic statesmanship, geo-economics, climate policy, and Germany's geopolitical strategy. Thank you very much for joining me today, Guntram, and welcome to the Bulletin.
Well, thank you so much, Alyssa, for having me.
No, my pleasure. So, going through your bio and going through your CV, there is a lot that you've achieved, clearly. But where did your career start? Where did all of your interest in policy, economics, and governments start from?
Well, look, I think even as a teenager, I really got interested in questions of poverty, development. Why people are poor and Germany is so rich, and why there's unemployment. These kind of questions were already on my mind. As a young adult, and then I decided that I want to really study economics to understand that. And when you start studying economics, you actually at first you are quite surprised, right? Because you do all these models, you do theory, you do even law and statistics. And you're like, well, but I just wanted to understand why there is unemployment and why in the region where I grew up, the German Ruhrgebiet, which is a coal and mining region, why it is so difficult to switch away and go away from mining. And I wanted to understand that, and instead I learned these theoretical models, which are all very complicated. And so it took me a while to understand that this is actually a great toolkit that you can use throughout all your life, and which will really help you understand many things, because you have the capacity to think in terms of relations, in terms of models, in terms of statistical regularities, and that was really the start.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you say that, because my background's more in sort of social policy, and at the Brandt School we do obviously have economic subjects. And when you really start diving into the theories and the models, you can see that there's behind every type of policy, there really is an economic sort of link to it. You can't really get around the economics. If you're looking at policy, it's always going to be woven into somewhere. So I think that for me, myself, as a student who's currently studying policy, that's really become evident that you really do have to have some sort of level of economic knowledge to be able to write good policy. So I think that's really important. Yeah. And while looking at your bio, you've held many positions, lots in multinational and regional organizations, where there's been more of a focus on reforms, particularly the G20 and European Commission. And I would understand that these would be extremely complex environments with a lot of different players, all performing differently, having different capacities, nationally speaking. They have different cultures and different goals for the future. So how do you navigate those really complicated environments?
Well, look, I think I would start by saying that after my PhD at the University of Bonn, I really started working for the German central bank. So I worked for a very German institution, but an institution that at the time was also quite in a change, because the euro had just been founded a few years earlier. And so it meant that this institution that historically had really the power of monetary policy over not just Germany but much of Europe, all of a sudden became just one of many players. And so it was very interesting to work in that national institution, learn about sort of that transition, and of course also learn about very deep issues on economics and fiscal policy making, and monetary policy making in the monetary union. And so then I moved to the European Commission, and as you say, of course it's more complex because it's international. There's many many economists, many political scientists from across Europe, and so you really have a European debate, right? And so that's more complex. But honestly speaking, it is really a question of intellectual depth and intellectual honesty when you do this at a working level, right? I mean, there's the political debate, which is more complicated. But at the working level, when you discuss with a good Italian economist or a good French economist, sure, you have your disagreements, but sort of you're speaking the same language, right? And so you're really debating substantive issues, and that's a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed that time a lot. So yes, I don't think this complexity was really shocking to me. On the contrary, I quite enjoyed that. I guess what's been more complicated is when once I moved out from an economist position to basically a think tank, Bruegel, and was starting to get involved in management, in sort of editorial processes, in communication, speaking to the press, but also fundraising and internal HR policies, you name it. I mean, so when you are entering a small think tank, which at the time Bruegel was actually quite small, was like 25 people perhaps. I mean, you're basically doing everything, right? I mean, and that's fun. I mean, it's very interesting. It's a lot of fun because you get really hands-on experience on, I don't know, accounting, right? I mean, of course there was an accountant, but you work with the accountant, and I mean, you basically do so many things, and so it's very diverse, right? The work. And so I enjoyed that actually also quite a lot, but it's very complex, and it took a lot of energy and time to really do that. But it's when you see that you shape things, I mean, it's always fun, and so yeah, I enjoyed that.
Yeah, I think each role really does have its own, I suppose, positives and negatives.
That's
And
right.
depending on the organization you're in, you can learn new skills, which so it sounds quite nice that you've actually had the diversity in roles to be able to focus on economics, which is what you were trained in, but then also like expand on from there. So that's always nice to be able to sort of constantly be learning. And I think as um, university students, and a lot of us who are the students here in the master's program, we already have some sort of professional experience. So we really are hoping that when we get into the professional world, that we will keep learning and expanding upon our skills. So that's good to know. But in terms of
Well, I
the
mean, just to say on this, I mean, it's always good to learn, but what you also do increasingly, and what I really think is very important, is that you empower people, right? I mean, you make it possible for others to strive and to succeed, and you help them overcome whatever problems they have, but you really give them ownership in an organization. That's very important. And that's something that you don't really learn that at university, right? I mean, at university you learn many things, but you don't really learn how to lead people, or at most universities, at least I didn't learn it at university. And I think at the end of the day, a good organization really works because there's so many good people working together and finding ways of harmoniously and productively working together.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point that you've made. And have you found that in the organizations you've worked in that there's been sort of key elements in those organizations that have really allowed people to be for their staff to be empowered? Are there like key factors that you think really support that?
Well, I mean, I think what is important is that it's sort of clear what the organization stands for, right? I mean, that's very important, and then it's very important that people do have some, I'm not saying free time, but some breathing air, right? I mean, so if an organization is extremely tightly woven and there's no flexibility whatsoever, I mean, then it's getting much more complicated for people to really strive, because they're just sort of running after the next bill and running after the next deliverable, and that's not a good state for an organization to be in. So it's really those two things. I mean, a direction, a sense of team spirit, and a bit of time to breathe and advance things, I would say.
That's really good, really interesting things to think about. And you've obviously had a few different roles through your career thus far, and a lot of exciting situations. But I can also imagine quite a few probably quite stressful and challenging professional moments. What has been one of your most challenging professional moment, and how did you navigate through that?
Well, look, I mean, there's always the upsides and the downsides. I would say the challenging stuff is always when it comes to people at the end of the day, and personal relations, right? I mean, so when there's tensions in the team, or God forbid, when even team members leave or have to leave, or these kind of things are always very, very difficult, and never to be taken lightly. But I think it's the kind of things where you have to be fair and you have to be clear, and then usually it goes. But I mean, that's I would say what certainly stresses you personally the most when you are in a leadership position.
And have you found that in maybe even your earlier career, when you were first starting those leadership or first getting those leadership roles, was there a little bit of like trial and error, or did you receive good support from your managers and your supervisors?
Oh, I mean, there's of course both. Huh? I mean, so you need you need to experiment and try certain things, and you need to find your own style. But of course, you need support, right? I mean, you're always part of a bigger system, and if you don't have good support, I mean, then it's very difficult actually.
And have you seen that change at all in the workplace? Because a lot of things have changed a lot since COVID, in particularly. But over your career, have you seen that there's been maybe a greater level of support given from manager to staff member, or has there been any change or not?
Well, I guess what I would observe thinking back about the last 20 years, and of course it's difficult to think about these last 20 years because there's been also different institutions, right? But I mean, what I would certainly think is that 20 years ago, working was much more hierarchical, right? I mean, so there was a sort of, I mean, even at university, I mean, there was a sort of the professor, and then nobody else, right? And so, so that has changed a lot, and I think rightly so. I mean, it's much more inclusive, the workplace, and I think it's much more clear that everybody counts and contributes, right? I mean, so this is, I would say, certainly, I would say it's a big change in the way work was organized. But of course, I realized that an institution like the German central bank is, of course, a bureaucracy with clear hierarchies, which is different to a think tank. Yeah, so think tank world. I mean, one reason why think tank world is fun is also that it's probably much less hierarchical than big bureaucracies, even though also in think tanks, of course, there has to be some organizational principles. Well, so I would say that this would be sort of the main change I would sort of think about for the last 20 years. But I'm sure there are others. And as you said, COVID. I mean, COVID has been quite a big change. This more hybrid work is different. I personally actually like it a lot because it gives me personally also a lot of freedom, and many people, I think, really enjoy that freedom. Working 1 week from somewhere else, or at least half a week from somewhere else, and I think at the end of the day, that's a good thing for everybody. But I do insist that it's actually important to meet in person. It's not enough to just meet online. During the COVID period, which I spent still at my old place, Bruegel, we could sustain business and actually expand and do a lot of activities, but we could only do it because we were really such a close team before COVID started, and knew each other for many years and were really trusting each other, and that's why it worked really well. But then the more people you onboarded, the more difficult it became, right? So it's very important to meet in person.
Yeah, I think COVID was interesting because I think we all did enjoy having that more flexibility in our work schedule and work life. But I think we all discovered that we also craved that human interaction. So I think, yeah, finding a good balance between those two is sort of one positive thing that's come out of COVID, definitely.
That's right.
And for those who are sort of wanting to pursue a similar career pathway that you followed, as I'm sure many of our listeners are, the students of the university and other people interested, what would you say are 3 important things that they should consider if they are wanting to sort of succeed in this space?
Okay, I mean, so I think there's no sort of recipe, and every person is different. But I mean, if I take sort of away 2, 3 points that I consider important, I would say certainly one important point is to gain some experience in policymaking, directly in policymaking, meaning don't just write about policymaking. I mean, actually do it. And even if you are not higher up in the hierarchy, even if you're just a simple person in a ministry or an international organization, I mean, you learn so much by being part of the system, really, and understanding how people think, what are the constraints, what are the sort of the things one can reasonably do within the organization. I mean, this is really important. I mean, gain practical experience. So I guess that would be number one. I mean, then okay. I mean, I do think academic rigor and really sort of very close attention to detail is actually very important. I mean, you have to. I mean, it matters whether you get your facts right and whether you cite the literature correctly or not. And that is something that, of course, we all learn at university. And I think it's really important to learn this very well and also apply it in your job. And look, what else would I say? I mean, I think perhaps my third point would be. It's well, I mean, there's so many points one could mention, but perhaps I would mention the power of networks, right? I mean, so sort of think about who are the people that are important to relate to when it comes to a certain topic. Do Why not call somebody up who is perhaps more an expert than you on a certain topic when you say something in that area? I mean, these networks become increasingly important, I would say. And by the way, a lot is also on social media now. I mean, you get a lot of this network and can sustain it on social media and get a lot of information on social media, but you have to know, of course, whom to follow and whom to trust on certain issues. But none of us has the wisdom for all of it. You have to really collaborate in teams and find the right networks to advance things.
All good points. And I think, yeah, it is definitely a hard question to try to sum up your whole how you got to where you are in just a few points. When, as you did mention, it does really depend a lot upon the person and their character and their work ethic. But those 3 points are all quite, I think, useful for people who are trying to make maybe the next step from university into their professional life, and how they can try to get those jobs that they're sort of wanting and be in the sectors that they're wanting to try to make some change. But as I did mention in the introduction, you are now an honorary professor at the University of Erfurt, which is very exciting. And what are your plans whilst you're here at the university and here in Erfurt? What can we expect?
Well, look, I mean, I'm really looking forward to interacting with the many bright students of the university, and especially of the Willy Brandt School. So this is really going to be fun, and I look forward to the also the fact that there's so many international students there, and I think I will learn myself a lot from the different perspectives from all the various countries that are represented at the university. So I think that's going to be really, really exciting. And look, in terms of my substantive teaching, what I want to teach is I want to teach a course on the economics of climate change, which is, I think, a really, really big and important topic. The other course I will teach is on European integration questions, and I have to still decide what exactly and how to relate it to the global public policy debate. But I think there's lots of interesting parallels. Look, and on the economics of climate change, I really got very interested in this because it is climate change is perhaps the biggest, or at least one of the biggest threats to our planet, and it's man-made. And it's very much driven by essentially emissions that come from production processes. So it comes from economics, right? Then there's basically two schools of thought. I mean, there's those that think, okay, I mean, we are never going to be able to continue to thrive economically and grow economically while at the same time saving the climate. And therefore, what we have to do is actually we have to sacrifice, right? We have to grow less, we have to degrow, and we have to, just consume less, fly less on holidays, and really change the way we live. So that's one school of thought, and then there is another school of thought that says, okay, I mean, basically that's never going to happen, right? I mean, it might be true, but it's never going to happen, right? People will continue to consume. They want to go on holidays. They want to eat their beef, etc., etc. And that school of thought says, okay, what we really have to do is we have to find ways of decarbonizing the way we produce, right? And that's the sort of strategy. How do we decarbonize our economy? And what does it mean? And then the seminar that I want to do is really talk about what does it mean to decarbonize. I mean, what kind of technology do we need? What kind of investments will we need? How do we have to organize global trade? How do we need to organize global climate negotiations so that everybody actually starts doing this, and not just a few countries like the European Union that is actually quite ambitious in its decarbonization efforts. How do we bring China on board in decarbonizing? I mean, I think these are really, really big and exciting questions. And I want in the seminar, I really want to present on each topic a bit myself, but then really give the students tasks, and every student is supposed to then give a presentation and write a little seminar thesis, and really have then a very interactive debate on these issues, because these are big issues and they are, I think, really crucial issues for humanity.
Sounds like a lot of interesting things. And speaking as one of the students, I'm quite excited for the next semester coming up. And I hope I can slot in one of your subjects into my timetable, definitely.
Well, it's going to be a block course. So in that sense, it's probably going to be easy. I'm going to do it on Friday afternoon and Saturday morning. So you have to actually get up on the Saturday morning. But I think it's going to be two times those 24 hours that you should reserve. And I think it's going to be very interesting.
Right. Yeah. And I think, well, because as you mentioned, climate change is one of the biggest issues that we're all having to really approach and factor into our work right now. So I think it's not just the energy sector that's thinking about this. Every sector now has to really factor this in and think about how that they can decarbonize or make more energy efficient choices. So I think it's a very widely applicable topic, which will be great to have into the syllabus. So that sounds all really exciting. And thank you for giving me your time today. It's been a really exciting conversation. And I can't wait to see you on campus.
Very much looking forward to meeting you in person. Thank you, Alyssa, for having me on the show.
No, my pleasure. And thank you to our listeners for joining us in today's Brandt School Bulletin Podcast. Tune in next time for another noteworthy episode.